Hey, everybody, welcome. I'm Sarah Beth Burke, and this is Becoming More Than Your Title. Because aren't we all more than our job titles? I know that's something I realized a number of years ago. Why am I just a director? Or why am I being called a teacher? I know I do more in the world. How do I express that? So that is what we investigate in this series that I've been doing is I bring in different professionals to share their stories of their career, but not just their career, about their professional identity. Today, my guest is Marisa Handler. She has such a multifaceted background from singing and writing and healing and spirituality, and I think a number of things. I'm still learning about her. And that's just the point. We gain and accumulate many professional identities over our lifetimes, over our careers. But it starts to get confusing about who we really are when you have all these different identities that people know you as. So even just in my early conversation with Marisa, getting prepared for this today, we were talking about this disparity, this disparateness between this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing. How do they fit together? But they do. And that's what I've been researching and writing about in More Than My Title, which is the name of my book and my platform. Well, there are people in the workforce that are not just experts and generalists. They are hybrids. Hybridity is this special way we haven't been thinking about defining a segment of the workforce because we didn't know what to call it. And my definition of hybrid professionals are people who are integrating different identities together in their work and working at the intersection of those identities, because the center of the intersection is where the unique value is created. It's where your truest gifts are formed, because you're a combination of identities that nobody has put together before. And that is your differentiator. So hybrid professionals are really a leading edge kind of idea of who people are in their work and how they do what they do. And that's why I'm having these conversations, is to let you hear how other people who are not just jacks of all trades or generalists or experts, how they're making sense and sharing their gifts in the world, because this is such a hard thing to talk about. That's why I love researching it. My biggest question that I want you to focus on is, who are you at the intersections of your different identities? So we're going to dive in and hear from Marisa. Let's get started. Hello, Marisa. Welcome.
Hello, Sarah Beth. Thank you.
How are you doing today?
I'm pretty well, thank you. Yeah, how are you?
I'm great. I love that you helped us do a little grounding before we got started, because that's something I know, like many people, I'm busy going from Zoom to Zoom or meeting to meeting, and taking some breaths and just being in my body and in my chair is like such a good reminder. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Absolutely.
So my goal is to help us learn about you and your career story and your professional identities. And my favorite way to jump in is by asking the question, what do you do? Because that's what we always tend to start with. Whether or not it's the best question, I think it's just how our society operates. So without pausing or stalling, Marisa, tell us, what do you do?
Yes, it's always been a hard question for me to answer. And so I would say I'm an artist and I'm a teacher / healer. And the easiest way to answer it is just to say I'm a writer, because that's been an identity from, I suppose, as soon as I could write. I write, I sing, I write music. Even in writing, I'm hyper, I write and publish fiction, poetry, and nonfiction.
Wow.
Then there's music. And then I work with people one-on-one as a coach, both as in writing and creative process, working through blocks, and then also actually on personal transformation, healing, and awakening.
Hmm.
And then I teach in both as well. So I teach at different institutions, and cross that boundary as well between kind of the academic institution, teaching creative writing at Stanford, and then teaching meditation at Spirit Rock or
Wow.
Esalen or something. So it is all over the place. It's not an easy question for me to answer.
Well, that's exactly why I start there, because this is what happens. It's like, well, where do I start, first of all? And then you start listing some things, but then you're like, oh, but then there's this other side and this other side. Oh, but this thing and this. And we are just a collection of these identities that we have accumulated, which I think is really natural for people like you and myself, where we're curious and we don't sit still, and we need to feed all these different parts of our interests and passions. So therefore, we have all these identities. I was hearing you say, even from the first sentence, you mentioned you're an artist and a teacher and a healer, but then you added the writer in there. Start to tell me about what it's like to have all these different identities. Do you feel like you have to segment them? Are they working together? What is that like for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I saw your book, I thought, gosh, I really wish someone had given me this book at like 20 or 30, or really, I mean, it would have been very helpful. I've never been a one pony. I just never one trick pony, never. And so, and I've always, but we live in a culture, we internalize the culture we live in, of course. And so there's always been this voice in my head that's like, just figure it out and do it. And I mean, I was at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and it felt like my peers, all they thought about and was writing fiction, which is an amazing thing to think about and do. But I always felt like I'm kind of out of place, because that's, I mean, of course they cared about other things as well, but I had whole other areas of myself that wanted to be creative and wanted to unfold. And so there was, in many environments I've been in, there's been this internal pressure to somehow kind of assimilate into that environment. And so it's an ongoing and unfolding question. And it's changed at different points in my life. If you'd asked me in my mid-20s, I would have said I'm an activist and I freelance write on the side, about social justice issues. At any point, it would have changed. Yeah.
I love those two words you just said about it changing over time and unfolding, because that captures our identities so well that, we aren't the people that we were in our teens and 20s and 30s. And even right now, I'm like, oh, I'll probably be like this, except I know in 10 more years, I'll have different interests and tastes and activities. And so this fluid nature of our identity also translates to our profession. And part of me is wondering, because you were saying you teach at Stanford, but then you're also at Esalen. How do you show up in those two very different spaces? One being this academic university that is world renowned, and the other is a very spiritual center. Tell me about your identity and how people see you in those different spaces and how you feel.
Yeah, good question. I suppose in both of those I'm teacher, although honestly, I feel like the more I go in life, the more I just feel like I'd rather be the student all the time, really. There's no difference. I mean, we have our different pockets of knowledge and we can share those, but beyond that, my own journey keeps humbling me. So relentlessly. But I guess, so I think I actually just show up as me. And if I'm at Stanford and I teach it through their continuing studies, so it's with the adult community there, through their, they have something called the Writer's Studio. I always begin my teaching with meditation. I think it's an incredible tool to bring to writing, to bring to creative writing. And so if I'm teaching at Esalen, I will bring in writing, like I'll have people free write, because that's an incredible tool to get into our depths. So I think it's really just, what do I draw on in what context? But I think, probably within the Stanford, the faculty teaching within that program at Stanford, I'm definitely on the kind of more woo end of things, I would say. But I do have a very solid background in like actual craft and process, and so I can put that hat on, like,
right.
what what makes for an excellent piece of writing and what is needed on a critique level to bring it there, as well as the writing for expansion, for healing, for discovery, creative process, all of these things.
That is so interesting. I'm curious, let's just pause on the Stanford side for a moment and your students there. Who do they expect you to be when you walk in the classroom on day one? Do they see you as Marisa, a professor, or this writing instructor? Like, what is their concept, do you think? And then what are they surprised to find out as you get to know them?
Well, one thing I've noticed is they never think I'm the teacher when I walk in, ever.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's kind of like, do, like, I don't know. I think I'd like to think I just look so young that they, I don't know what it is. But so once I go to the front of the class, people are often actually a bit surprised. What I've noticed is they relax as we go along. I think often it's a classroom setting. I always request a room with a lot of natural light, and there's certain things, and I always have us sit in a circle or have the tables in a formation where we can all see each other. Yeah, and of course in any creative writing setting, a core part is sharing your work and hearing the work of your peers, and so people open up over the course of that process. I feel like I watch them grow more relaxed, and I'm just me, I tend to bring a sense of humor to things. I think I tend to be quite gentle around and encouraging. I've had experiences within workshop settings where it hasn't been that, and I know how painful that's been.
Yeah.
So I really try to have a setting that feels really nurturing. So I think people tend to relax over the course from when we start. Yeah.
You've said a couple different times that you just show up as you. And I think that's such a wonderful reminder of, at the end of the day, we don't have labels on us. Like, we are just you and me. And, whether we go by our names like Sarah Beth, Marisa, or just as humans, and that your students start to relax and just accept you and see these different parts of yourself without even maybe knowing what to call it or even knowing that you're the teacher. So tell me about your process a little bit, because I think there's something hybrids do without realizing it. It's usually unconscious. So we'll see how much you can reflect on yourself, where you're weaving together different tools and practices from all these different identities and disciplines you have. So you mentioned creating this relaxing space, this safe space, nurturing, I think you used in your writing courses. But that's not what all writing teachers do. So already I'm seeing an intersection, right? Can you think of any other ways that you are crossing different modalities together in your work?
Yeah. They completely interpenetrate. I mean, so, for my early 20s, I've been a really committed spiritual practitioner. I came into Buddhism quite young and did a lot of sitting silent retreats. Now I teach in that realm, but even just in that process, there's a certain way you're supposed to do things, and I think once you have a sense of technique, it's I'm an artist. I bring creative process into that, and I think that so they completely interpenetrate, so when I'm teaching, for example, or working with a client one-on-one, I may have a whole range of tools to draw on, but I tend to work really intuitively, which is the same way I work creatively. If I'm working on a story or a poem, for the first draft, it's no judgment, no critique, just let it just intuition, really. So I think they completely interpenetrate, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the ways that they feed each other and nourish each other. It feels like, again, the further I go, the more these seemingly disparate strands come together and enrich each other, actually.
Oh, I got chills with that one. The interpenetration, I haven't heard that word. talk about like interconnection or boundarylessness or third space. Like there's so much language to talk about that weaving and intertwining, but interpenetration is beautiful. I'm going to borrow that. And you just mentioned how they get richer together, which I can also attest to. I've heard many people say it's by using these different things simultaneously that something much bigger comes out of it. And it is a space where we're not always aware. We're kind of just in that flow, or it's so kind of muscle memory that we don't know we're doing what we do. It just feels good. It's who we are, back to that. Earlier when you and I were prepping, you talked about some of the common threads you've noticed that have been carrying through in your identities and your career. Can you talk more about that? What are the threads you've seen, even though you keep changing and gaining identities?
Yeah, I think underlying everything is a deep spiritual foundation, really. The word spiritual is always feels questionable to me because there's so many connotations these days, but we don't have a better one. But just a deep foundation in truth, I would say, like, which just keeps getting deeper the further I go. And a deep commitment to truth, really, I would say, to truth and to beauty, the ways that I experience them and see them. And to practice, to holding myself accountable in certain ways, to keep looking, and keep moving almost. And so that's there underneath everything. It's been there. I did my activism in my 20s, also just coming from a sense of interconnection of everybody deserving to have freedom and equality, basic things like that. And it's certainly been a primary theme in all of my creative work. My memoir is very much about how to reconcile, how do we make change in the world with how to transform ourselves. And it's absolutely increasingly an element of my teaching and coaching. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. I think what I'm hearing, because this often happens, right? When I'm meeting with people, we start at a layer where we're here, like, I'm this writer, I'm an author, I practice meditation. But then what I'm starting to hear, these deeper truths about yourself of who you are that maybe you haven't labeled before or given this name, like a seeker. Like the word seeker has been coming through in all of these different areas of your life, whether you're learning some new spirituality practice or trying activism, you've been seeking and testing. So I'm like, maybe that's a deeper identity she's really holding on to and doesn't realize. Does that bring anything up for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And it's, there's this beautiful quote from Rilke about holding the questions, these like locked boxes, I think he says in one of his poems. And it just, and Baldwin, James Baldwin also says the role of an artist is to, I think it's the role of, I'm paraphrasing here, but the role of the artist is to exhume the questions that have no answer, something like that. And I just think, living into our questions and it remains open for me. It remains, there's some very strong themes. I think anybody who works with me or looks at my website would think, oh, she knows what she's doing, but it's still unfolding, and I like it that way. I like that it just becomes more and more stepping into the unknown, radically into the unknown. Like, what even is a body? What even is a human? Some of these fundamental questions.
Yeah, well, let's go back there, because you said you'd wish you had seen my book in your 20s or earlier. What do you wish you had known back then? What would you have told your younger self based on the revelations you're having about identity today?
I would say trust yourself. Trust, like, I kind of always followed my heart. It started, I had a job offer at 21. I was a senior at Berkeley, and McKinsey Management Consulting recruited among people with my scholarship, and I ended up being one out of 80 people. Oh no, I think there were 80 people who were recruited. 4 of us got offered jobs. I got offered a job in management consulting, and I ended up turning it down, which everybody in my life advised against. I think I just would say, just trust yourself, trust the journey, trust the journey. Trust your heart, trust just one step at a time. You don't need to know.
Can we go back to that moment for a second when you turned down this consulting job at McKinsey? Because I think other people I've talked to or that have watched, know some of these big career moves, people that were in corporate or, started here, went someplace else. But you even knew at that young age, like you said no to it. So what was going on for you at that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't burn any bridges, so I said to the head of the office, I didn't, I never, obviously I never followed up on it, but I was sort of sensible about it in that sense. But I think, it just didn't feel like me. I wanted to sing and save the world. That's what felt like me. And I think I had the sense, look, if they want me now, they'll probably want me at a later point still, so there was the sense that I can pick up on this later if I want. So it didn't feel like a terrible finality in that point, in that sense. It did take some, I don't know, kishkas would be the Yiddish word, to kind of buck buck what the trend, in the sense of what everybody in my life was saying, like, oh my God, this is a dream job, go take this, you're set for life,
Yeah.
That was harder. Yeah.
Well, it's really reconciling, even in those younger years, who are you, right? Like you knew your interests, you had this fascination with art and activism and writing, but yet you also seem to be very talented in business consulting. And that's why McKinsey wanted you. And you knew a deeper side of who you really were, maybe without knowing where it was going to take you. But you, back to your own words, you trusted something inside of yourself that I think if I had been that age, I don't know, not as many people maybe have that clarity or that confidence to trust that deeply. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a lot easier now, and that was one point, and it's been a while. So, but I want to sort of put the caveat out that there's been a tremendous amount of self-questioning and self-judgment too around, and self-laceration around, like, I should be this, I should be more normal, I should be making more money, I should look at all these people going along in their traditional career paths. Like, why aren't I? Could have the ways that I could have shown up, or again, there's a certain way that I have certainly, I've followed my own path and followed my bliss, as Joseph Campbell would say, but there's also been a tremendous amount of self-questioning along the way. And I think the process of writing a memoir, I wrote, it wasn't my idea, actually, it was my editor's idea, but I wrote a memoir at 28, and it came out when I was 30. And I just, that was such a helpful moment, because I had to kind of find narrative form for experiences from my whole life up until that point. And I started to see that I wasn't just finding form. There actually had been a journey. There had been a path, and that was a very helpful exercise. It felt very loose up until then. And like, I don't know what I'm doing. I should just go be should I be the head of an NGO? Should I be what should I be?
Wow. So writing a memoir when you were 28, that's, not something most people do, because I think you wait until you have more life experience.
That's what I said to my editor.
So why did they think that was the right time for you?
I was writing a different book that was more academic, that was bringing essentially a spiritual lens to looking at corporate globalization, to looking at what was happening economically in the world, and how we were using the resource, bringing questions of consciousness to the fact that we seemed hell-bent on destroying the vessel on which we depend, i.e. Earth and its ecosystems. Like, why on a deep level are we doing that? And that was the question I was bringing. And I was writing a much more academic work, actually drawing on economists and all kinds of things. And then also drawing, in typical fashion on Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism and Judaism, Old Testament, all kinds. And my editor said, I think you've had some amazing, interesting experiences. She'd looked at my portfolio, and I'd been freelancing about the global justice movement in this country, from kind of within the movement, like for salon.com and other places. And then I'd been writing, basically, I love to travel. So I'd been gone, gallivanting all over the globe, writing about communities, and circumstances which were connected to these issues. And she basically said, I think your points would come across much better through your personal stories. And I think she was right. I was very resistant initially. She said, I think you should write a memoir. And I said to her, wait, I'm not famous, I'm not even 30 yet. Like, really? So, but I think she was right in the end. Yeah. I mean, I wrote it and they published it and I did a whole book, it happened and it seemed to help the people who read it. I got a lot of lovely letters. Yeah.
Marisa, I have to highlight this. That is a moment of your hybridity. That's your intersectionality in that memoir, right? Because that the author in you is coming alive. I didn't even know these sides of economist and theorist and philosopher and Buddha. Like, I'm hearing all of these viewpoints and interests from your life were compounding and colliding into this memoir. Does that sound like a hybrid moment for you?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Would be the short answer. Yeah.
That's amazing. I think I had to snapshot that because that's exactly what I hear so often in interviewing and talking with people. So to capture it in this moment, I was like, oh my gosh. So many of us are just doing things that we are not aware of, that we just kind of take for granted. And we're like, this is just what I do in my work. And yet these micro moments, that's kind of my term for them, where our hybridity is showing up and we don't see it. Like, this is one of them in the memoir. And they really encapsulate our truest us. Like, every part about you that you love and enjoy and feels like your best identity was apparent in that activity, that product, the memoir. And then you even said the reception of it, people were curious and you appreciated what you wrote. I think that's the sign that when you're in your hybridity, people are attracted to this like richness, this thing that you've become. So that was a really important little story. And I was just excited that you were sharing it with us.
Thank you. Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like when I try to encapsulate what I do, I'm realizing this would be a better way of answering the question you asked in the beginning. It would be, in terms of how I work with people, it would be helping people find their highest freedom to unlock their deepest creative gifts and ultimately share those with the world. And I notice I tend to draw hybrids too. I tend to draw often people who are creatives, feeling blocked, or people who are stuck in their own paths and have a lot of creative potential or possibilities, people generally who have some foundation in spiritual practice. So it's kind of interesting to see you putting this lens on it helps me see, oh, wow, yeah, like, right. The people that come into my life are that as well. Awesome.
I love this. I think the gift of revealing hybridity is that, one, we get to see more of ourselves in a new way. But also we get to share that with the world and help other people realize their hybridity too. Because I think a lot of us, I mean, this is where I was at in my career for so long. I didn't realize I was allowed to interconnect my different identities. I thought it was, as you had mentioned earlier, like, pick a path, choose one. You have to narrow it down. And that never felt comfortable because I would choose one, but it wouldn't last. I would have to like untether to get back to this other one because I just kept putting each one on the sideline and then jumping back and forth. And helping reach out to people and showing them that they can access and incorporate and do what you and I are doing and like become their hybridity, I think is transformative work. I think, yeah.
I think every new graduate should be given a copy of your book, really, because I think I think we find our zone of genius at the intersection of our multiple talents or interests, like where the hybrid, what you call the hybrid, where it comes together, that's the zone of genius. And that's where I would truly say, in following our bliss, we arrive there, and the world needs more people who do that, because it just, we're at a point globally. We need everybody's genius at this point to emerge, to come up with new solutions, new possibilities. And we don't just get to our genius by doing what we're told. We get to our genius by listening to what we love too.
Yeah, for me, it's that combination of what are you doing that you love and why are you doing it? And then who do you call yourself? Like, who are you when you're doing that work? Because we just get stuck in these boxes. Oh, you're just another artist and writer. And it's like, no, Marisa's so much more. And who is she really? And it defies language. And that's time and again where we get stuck. The last person I interviewed in one of these, we had a debate about labels and if they were necessary or unnecessary. And I think it truly depends on the person and their professional situation. But for most individuals, you have to walk into the world with some kind of label, some kind of title or name. That's just how we make meaning of each other. And so I challenge you, even when we're finished with the interview, to think, like, what kind of artist, healer, teacher, writer are you really? And how do you find richer language to play with to describe that? Because that's where you get to kind of reveal the hybridity. And then that beautiful definition you gave us a moment ago, which we're going to have to rewind this video to get it perfect because you said it just elegantly. That definition you shared is your definition of your hybridity. And that's how I think the two come together. What do you call yourself? And then what does it mean?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we do need to answer that question. It's interesting, the whole title thing. I've played with, like, I started putting meditations up on Insight Timer, and I was like, well, what do I call me? So I put a couple. I played with a couple of possibilities. One was sort of it was like Maven of Creative Transformation or something, like, it's just a mouthful. Or like Creative Alchemist. So there are these ways, and then right, it on a grounded practical level, there's and what you're saying is absolutely true. When I meet someone, I'm curious about what they do. It's the same as wondering about just any questions that come up in our mind. We want to know who we're talking to.
Yeah, it's a puzzle, and that's why I'm on this research journey, is to think more deeply, and to your point, more self-reflectively of, like, who am I really, and how am I showing up in the world, and what do I call that? And we are creatives. All of us as humans are creators, and so we can create and invent who we want to be and what we call that. And that permission is where I'm the most excited, because no one told me you get to call yourself what you want. And there's so many possibilities. Yeah.
I love that. I really love that. And I'm going to sit with that question afterwards, because it's just so rich. And it seems to me, I think, this is the case with writing too. Like, there's the paradoxes, the deeper we get into the particular, the more we access the universal. And I think that's true here too, because it's almost like the deeper we go into, well, what exactly are we and who are we, and get very specific and particular about it, the more we can tap into something that everybody can recognize and somehow identify with. It's an interesting paradox. The beautiful things about being human, I think, is that we're, like, on some level the same, and I truly believe, like, profoundly connected. And at the same time, the beauty is in our diversity and particularity.
Oh, I love everything you just said, that the going deeper connects us to the more universal. I think something like that. I need to rewatch it, but that the last couple sentences were just very profound. I think that's a great stopping point for us today. Maybe we'll have you come back and we'll play with some hybrid titles for you. Who knows? But
sounds like fun.
Thank you. I would love for people to know where to find you if they want to learn more about your hybridity and your writing and your journey. So tell us where people can find you.
Yeah, so thank you. My website, that's right there. It has links to everything, bunch of my writing, music on Spotify and SoundCloud, coaching. I have a few spots at the moment open in my coaching practice. I think 2, actually. And teaching. I'm doing some upcoming teaching. I have a Facebook coaching page, which is basically under my name. What else? I'm currently teaching a Monday night through Zoom, Tuesday night, actually tonight, through Zoom writing and meditation group that's pretty open. And yeah, but probably my website is the best place.
That's great. And where are all of your books?
So, well, there's only one book that's out now. The second book I've been working on for 11 years. It's a novel. And I'm on draft 5, and at this point working with my agent to get it into final shape to sell to a house. So Loyal to the Sky, my memoir, it's on Amazon. It's on Amazon, and it's on my website. You can buy it through an independent bookstore via my website.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, that was fantastic. I definitely encourage people to follow up and follow and learn more about you. And if you are on this journey of figuring out your hybridity, find me at morethanmytitle.com or follow me at morethanmytitle. I've been doing these conversations weekly, and I'm really enjoying just not only getting a chance to reveal people's stories, but record them, because usually this happens behind the scenes on a phone call. And now I get to document and share more of these with a wider audience. So Marisa, I've really enjoyed our discussion. Thank you so much for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for asking such excellent questions.
Well, pleasure is mine. It goes both ways. And I will see you another time. Thank you for being here. Bye.